This was Hesse's ninth novel, and I've wanted to read some of his work, particularly The Glass Bead Game, for quite some time. But I've been sort of intimidated by it, so I chose Siddhartha to be my introduction to Hesse. Now, I'm not sure if this was the best place to start, but what's done is done. So let's talk about it. Hey everybody, welcome back to It's Too Late to Apologize Book Reviews. I'm Stella, and today we're going to be talking about Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Siddhartha was written by the German writer Hermann Hesse and was published in 1922. It was later translated and published in the US in 1951 and significantly impacted the 1960s. Today, this book doesn't really seem that unique with how the New Age movement has made its mark in the West. But at the time this was first written and then translated into English, it was unlike anything else the Western world had experienced. There are 6 English translations that I'm aware of. The Penguin Drop Caps Collection edition I have was translated by Joachim Neugroschel. If I can find any helpful links about the different English translations, I'll include them in the description box below. This was Hesse's 9th novel, and I've wanted to read some of his work, particularly The Glass Bead Game, for quite some time. I have this old, dilapidated, like missing its front cover, copy of The Glass Bead Game on my shelf for quite a few years now, but I've been sort of intimidated by it. So I figured I should go try a shorter work of his first to get an idea of his style. So that's what I did. So I chose Siddhartha to be my introduction to Hesse. Now, I'm not sure if this was the best place to start, but what's done is done. So let's talk about it. This book is 100 years old, so bear in mind spoilers are coming, because we're about to get into it. This book centers around a man named Siddhartha, and one shouldn't confuse that name with the name of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, because the real Buddha does make an appearance later in this novel. The name Siddhartha translates from Sanskrit to mean he who has found meaning, or he who has attained his goal. Our protagonist, Siddhartha, again, not the Buddha, starts out life from a very privileged perspective. His father is a Brahmin, a priest who is also a member of the highest Hindu caste. Everyone expects Siddhartha to become very important during his life, and his friend, Govinda, has decided to follow him wherever he goes because he also believes in Siddhartha's future potential. But Siddhartha comes to see the cyclical nature of the Brahmin ceremonies and customs as subterfuge, and he feels that something integral is missing from all the Brahmins can teach him through their holy scriptures. Siddhartha leaves his home and abandons his Brahmin father's traditions. He goes to the forest to follow the Sumanas, who live an ascetic life, and through this life he discovers the polar opposite of what he knew with the Brahmins. He embraces suffering and absolute poverty, and through meditation Siddhartha can adopt and understand the perspectives of animals and wind and water, but oddly enough, not of other people. That caste system goes deep. But again, Siddhartha sees that even the Sumanas don't have the answers he's looking for, because his older mentors are no closer to enlightenment than he is. So when Siddhartha hears of an enlightened man named Gautama, the Buddha, he leaves the Sumanas to seek out this man who has supposedly transcended suffering and attained enlightenment and nirvana. He finds Gautama and realizes that while the Buddha is wise and has indeed found enlightenment and nirvana, there is no guarantee that he will find those things by following him. He realizes he must pursue his own path and leaves his friend Govinda with the Buddha. Siddhartha follows a life of embracing the physical world. He travels and meets a beautiful courtesan named Kamala, and she becomes his teacher in the art of physical love and hedonistic pleasure. She introduces him to a wealthy merchant who takes Siddhartha in and teaches him his trade. Siddhartha does well, and over years of being a merchant, he becomes rich and indulges in the physical pleasures of the world. But over time, he finds emptiness in such a life and has slowly forgotten all the skills he had learned before pursuing physical passions. He decides to leave behind this life also. But at this point, he finds himself at his lowest and feels he has tried all the modes of living he knew of and still cannot find the goal or satisfaction he was searching for and has even regressed. He wanders into the forest and contemplates suicide, but he experiences a moment of clarity. He meets his old friend, Govinda, again, and is overcome with love for his friend. They part, and Siddhartha finds the ferryman he had met prior to meeting Kamala. He stays with the kind, quiet man named Vasudeva, who teaches Siddhartha to listen to nature and, specifically, the river, to find the truth of life. Siddhartha becomes the ferryman's apprentice, and eventually Kamala finds Siddhartha as she is traveling to see the Buddha. He discovers that Kamala became pregnant with his child before he left, and he meets his son just as Kamala dies from a snake bite. Siddhartha loves his son, but cannot discipline him, and eventually the spoiled boy runs away. Siddhartha goes searching for him, but he is gone. Vasudeva tries to help Siddhartha find peace with his loss, and as he mourns his son, he realizes he finally understands the child people's pain and finds nirvana through love. Vasudeva sees that Siddhartha has finally attained peace and can now leave him in his place as the ferryman. Govinda also seeks out the wise ferryman, but is unaware of his identity. Gautama has passed, and Govinda is still searching for enlightenment. He finds Siddhartha and asks him to teach him the wisdom he has found, and Govinda is able to find nirvana also. I find a big misunderstanding when reading this novel is that people assume that it is going to describe Buddhism or Hinduism to the reader, and that's not what it's doing. The novel Siddhartha is not about Buddhism or Hinduism, even though it is most involved in perceiving situations through what overlaps and differs between Hindu and Buddhist outlooks, as is seen in the Hindu goals encompassed by the 4 Purusarthas: Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. But the overlapping concepts of karma and samsara seen in both religions are present. But the revelation that all humans are equal regardless of class is definitely a Buddhist perception. The dharmas are ethics and duties, and Siddhartha lived a life of this with his Brahmin upbringing. In his upbringing, he becomes one of the thought people, or a privileged intellectual, for all his beliefs are taught to him through study, not through experience of the real world. And just like Goethe's Faust, all this study leaves him feeling that he lacks something integral. Another of the Purusarthas is Artha, which is prosperity and work. Siddhartha experiences this for the first time when he apprentices with the wealthy merchant. And the Purusartha Kama, which encompasses passion and desires, is seen when he learns from Kamala. Kama is even in Kamala's name. And the final Purusartha is Moksha, freedom, which Siddhartha explores in his own path and finally discovers it in a freedom from avoidance when he lives with the ferryman Vasudeva, whose name means all beings exist in that supreme being, and that he exists in all beings. And how interesting that a ferryman, by definition, is someone who helps travelers cross a difficult obstacle in their path. Siddhartha is about trying to understand the world, and how there is no one specific way to do it, but that we all struggle with understanding and not understanding it all simultaneously. And I feel most people focus on only Siddhartha, but we must remember that Govinda's journey is just as important. Both Govinda and Siddhartha achieve enlightenment and nirvana, but they reach that point from very different paths in life. Govinda took the approach of disciple or student. He relied upon the teachings of others to guide him through his life's journey. But on the other hand, Siddhartha had to find his own path and abandon many teachers along the way. But both men achieved their goals through love. Love is what helped them transcend suffering and awaken a moment of nirvana within themselves. So Hesse would have the reader understand that although all paths look different, one can find understanding and connection to the world through self-reflection and love. There is a debate happening here between the thought people, as they're called in the book, and the child people. The thought people are the intellectuals, the scholars, and the rich. And what we see through the themes of dark academia, like in The Secret History. And Donna Tartt did a fantastic job of this. And what we see is that when straying too far into their mode of experiencing the world, that these intellectuals can end up despising it. They fall into the trap of abstraction, generalizations, and dehumanization, as we see Siddhartha do himself. And as we see the Sumanas also do this in their attempt to ignore or push away the realm of the physical. Siddhartha sees this deflection of reality as akin to an alcoholic who consumes in the manner that they do to avoid reality. For an alcoholic, just like the Sumanas, relief from reality is temporary, just as the aesthetic pursuits of academia in The Secret History do for Henry. Ignoring reality cannot last. Early in the novel, Siddhartha refers to the child people in a demeaning way, for they are seen as the opposite of his known intellectualism. But he has experienced a very self-centered world where he relies on the charity of the people he belittles, as he has never worked or provided for himself or anyone else for even a day in his life. And this is not to simply throw away the benefits of study and knowledge, as we see that simply knowing how to read and write are such valuable skills that those alone make Siddhartha a viable apprentice for the merchant Kamaswami, as he himself cannot read or write. There is avoidance everywhere, and most often it's illogical and willful, leading to a skewed path. And even when Kamala and Siddhartha explore the passionate hunger of the body with each other, they know they can only do so because they will not allow themselves deep, affectionate love, which makes them both wise, but also cowards. Siddhartha doesn't deeply love anyone and fails to understand life, even though all his training and teachings have assured him that he understands the true nature of the world. And I must say, it is karmic that when Siddhartha feels he thinks he has gotten what he could out of his time with Kamala and the merchant life, fate says, no, 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 no. And bam! Kamala and Siddhartha got a baby. And there's no way that they won't learn how to surrender to real love now. Well done, Hesse. Well done. And through understanding this love, Siddhartha finally appreciates the plight of the child people and comes to love them also. Through the tragedy and suffering intimate love shows a person, defines how they will understand life and humanity. Siddhartha finally understands the pain he subjected his father to when he left and never returned. This is karma. This is the cycle of mankind. This is samsara. We see the exploration of the different types of love, and without this love there is no compassion or understanding, and these loves cannot be taught. They must be experienced. Siddhartha tells the reader that one cannot embark upon someone else's journey in the hopes of reaching their own destination, and that enlightenment is only glimpsed when a person goes through a transformation. It is not a constant state. It is instead the restructuring of one's internal world once one comes upon a profound realization. And I think one of the most profound ideas of this novel is that the individual can throw open the gates of their nature through honest self-reflection. And this is actually the basis of psychodynamic therapy, where a reformation of the self is possible if one minds the self deeply enough. And even past the psychological impacts of this is to realize there is a place inside the self where there is no need for intermediaries or priests or shills or teachers. There is no need for a middleman between oneself and the divine. And I find it really interesting that Hesse was a friend to Carl Jung, and Jung claims that his work had a direct influence on Siddhartha and Steppenwolf. And I'm really interested to read more about symbolism and archetypes, so I can't wait to read Jung's 4 archetypes. I've actually already started reading. I'll say it again. If you're looking for a book about Buddhism or Hinduism or about religion in general, this isn't it. Some people criticize this novel by calling it a glorified self-help book. And I'm not a fan of self-help books. But I didn't really see this as that either. This book can be considered semi-autobiographical, as Siddhartha's journey also mirrors some of Hesse's journey. Hesse stalled halfway through writing it because he felt he hadn't made the personal growth necessary to complete it. This book is about a man's journey in life, and how that will look very different to others' lives, and even to those witnessing that life. One cannot count on teachers, prophets, or gods to show one the way. Instead, one must forge their own path to discover essentially that life is suffering, but it is also beautiful. Some people dismiss this novel relatively quickly, and I admit I was close to doing the same thing in the first half. But upon completing it and rereading parts of it, I discovered that I really enjoyed it. Now, this is a fictional story that seems inspired by Hesse's search for his own personal, religious, or spiritual truth. Some might say that this novel belongs in the library's self-help section, or since it's a fiction, perhaps the more appropriate genre would be inspirational fiction or literature. I'm not a big fan of self-help books, and I dislike the inspirational fiction category. My dislike is centered mainly on a lot of self-help books written by people who have a few nuggets of wisdom and then pad a few simple thoughts into a book that's just way too long. And inspirational fiction tends to be quite heavy-handed in delivery and unrealistic in its outcomes, which I should clarify is an indictment of all books in those genres, but just that I'm leery for those reasons. Both of these genres encompass morality and ethics. Both those things are present in many books that we wouldn't categorize as inspirational fiction or self-help. But both genres heavily focus on a character or the writer making a change in their lives and ultimately is persuasively encouraging the reader to make that exact change also. But this is again quite a loose definition because many books could fall into these categories. But my personal distinction is a sort of vague line that poses to delineate obvious persuasion and manipulation without accounting for real-world problems and struggles. Now that is quite a subjective line that no two people will agree with, where exactly that line is. And I would even debate myself on where exactly that line is for myself. So, is Siddhartha art, or is it self-help or inspirational fiction? I argue that it straddles the fence. Something fierce. So, this leads up to another debate. Some say that art should not be concerned with morality, that the involvement of morality as a driving theme sabotages the art, whereas some would argue the opposite, that no real art can be completely devoid of morality, that the most impactful exemplary stories we have grapple with morality. So here we see the clash of the diametric principles of moralism and aestheticism. Moralism would argue that art should uphold a given society's moral standards, order, and customs. Plato, Proust, Tolstoy, and Johnson were all considered moralists. Tolstoy even considered his own work to be detrimental to humanity. This moralism can push dominant religious, political, and ideological views and see anything that does not further these narratives as seditious. The result is that it concerns itself with censorship and sees any individualistic or nonconformist ideas as rebellious. On the other hand, aestheticism proposes that moral standards should uphold art, that art is the most intense thing a human being can experience, and that nothing should get in its way. Authors such as Wilde, Bataille, Pater, and Gautier held aestheticism paramount to art. And the seed of aestheticism led to the decadent movement in the late 19th century, which formed in France and spread from there. In his description of aestheticism, Professor of Philosophy John Hosper writes, and I quote, "If it, meaning art, conflicts with morality, so much the worse for morality. And if the masses fail to appreciate it or receive the experience it has to offer, so much the worse for the masses. If there are morally undesirable effects of art, they do not really matter in comparison with this all-important experience that art can give. Few persons would wish to go so far. Even the most ardent lovers of art would stop short of saying that the value of art holds a monopoly over all other values." End quote. Aestheticism is chaos. These are two extremes at either ends of the creative scale. And as with all positions on a scale, there are pros and cons, no matter where one stands. My personal position is somewhere in the middle, as it usually is with most things. I don't think you can have art without some semblance of morality. Even if it's being opposed, it illustrates the consequences of rejecting morality. And I don't believe moralism is art unless it speaks to the individual about the realities of suffering and of the world and how senseless it can be. It can quickly become didactic and heavy-handed. And this is something that Shakespeare does so well for me. He breaks down the labels and categories we have placed one another in to examine complex situations with fleshed out characters through an application of sympathetic revelations that asks the reader to contend and wrestle with the matter presented. Good literature can be the gateway to a level of moral reflection that is difficult to attain in any other way. The science of the past becomes obsolete over time as new discoveries prove those of the past wrong or too narrow in scope. But great art is never archaic because it strikes something authentic and integral for humanity at its core. Good art will always be relevant to mankind. And in that way, I think Siddhartha will always be relevant also. Reading this novel took me down a rabbit hole of research and conversations and history of both East and West. And that's what a great book should do if you really dive into its contents. And I think many can easily dismiss Siddhartha and its simplicity and how short it is of a book and its writing style, and perhaps also dismiss other works from a sort of vapid and surface level manner and place. I believe it's essential to, at times, analyze and delve deeply into works that one doesn't understand, like, or cannot stop thinking about. I couldn't stop thinking about Siddhartha, and I believe it's crucial for individuals to read all sorts of manner of books and to wrestle with the subject matter, even though it may seem straightforward. Many times Siddhartha seemed very straightforward, but the deeper and the more time you took to look at it, the more you realize there was more to it. Whether classics or murder mysteries, young adult or fantasy, any genre or creative endeavor one consumes can illustrate a lot. But I think what's important to take note of is when the creative endeavors you experience and are consuming are no longer having an aesthetic or moralistic effect, but an anesthetic effect. Is it numbing the mind, or is it broadening its borders and exercising its capacity? Sometimes it's not the work, but how one consumes the work that is the real heart of the matter, which I gotta say is a whole other debate in itself. And that is a very individual endeavor that mimics the thesis of Siddhartha itself. It is a simple story with a lot of depth to explore. Each person's aesthetic journey will be different from everyone else's. The novels that are impactful and life-changing to one will not be the same for another. The great literary critics may extol a work that will never resonate with you, which is normal and okay. No two people's paths to enlightenment and hopefully nirvana will be the same, but all paths will require work and soul searching to arrive anywhere worth going. But if you read Siddhartha, what did you think? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Is art about aesthetics or morality to you? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like and subscribe so that more people can discover some great books. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.